welcome back to another CryptoDave video. As I mentioned in last week's video, I'm going to do a quick portfolio allocation video today. I'm going to try and keep this to sort of 5 minutes or so. It's very much going to be an overview of the coins that I'm holding, platforms that I'm using, stuff like that. I'm not going to be going into depth in any of these kind of platforms, but I will be doing that in future videos. So particularly the larger platforms like Aave and stuff like that, I will be going into in detail in future videos. But let's jump straight in and have a look at the coins that I'm currently holding. And as I mentioned last week, I'm pretty much entirely in stable coins at the moment, probably around 90%. I've got a small amount of Bitcoin still, about 8% Bitcoin, and then probably 2% just miscellaneous coins in various old wallets and stuff like that. But I'm mainly in stable coins at the moment, the vast majority of that in USDC, but across different chains. And the chains that I'm using, or the chains that I've got most liquidity on, are Ethereum mainnet and Base. This is largely for the DeFi stuff. I really like Base for its kind of cheap transactions. It's also one of the reasons why I'm using Coinbase. I'll talk about that later, but the ability to interact on Base natively on Coinbase, withdraw stuff on the Base chain with no fees. I'm also holding my Bitcoins obviously on Bitcoin mainnet, and I am also holding USDC on Solana. So stuff that I was doing with Solana in the kind of last cycle, I converted to USDC, and that USDC is still held on the Solana chain. I'm not holding Solana, but it's USDC on the Solana chain. And then in terms of the main lending and borrowing platforms I'm using, Aave by far the largest, particularly for Ethereum mainnet and Base, that are the two chains that I'm using it most. And I both lend and borrow on Aave. I'll do a future video probably next week on my kind of like rough strategies that I'm using on Aave. And I will bring XtraFi into that as well. So I use XtraFi on Base. The yields on stables are a little bit better than Aave, but it's instant deposit and withdrawal. So it's a nice place in to hold stables for me, as opposed to Aave, because the rates are better. Currently, probably looking at about twice as good rates on XtraFi as you are on Aave. Pendle, I will talk about. I'll do a specific video on Pendle. I have used Pendle a fair amount at the beginning of this year. The best yields tend to be on Ethereum mainnet, and that has a small problem in that when you're moving money in and out of that, the fees can be pretty high on Ethereum mainnet. I think even a simple transaction you're looking at $5. So I would say probably unless you're looking at $20,000 per position or up, it may or may not benefit you using Pendle with Ethereum mainnet. I have used some positions on Base there as well. That works really well because you're talking about a few pence to get stuff in and out of opportunities on Pendle. The other issue with Pendle, and you have to be a little bit kind of careful, because the biggest yields sometimes are within opportunities where the liquidity is pretty low. And I have had instances where you've come to the end of a kind of position on Pendle. It's run for like 3 months. You come to the end of it, and then suddenly you're trying to kind of like swap back to USDC or something like that, and the liquidity can be quite thin. So I had one position, I forget what it was on now, but it took me about two to 3 days. I had about a $20,000 position, but because the liquidity was quite thin, the slippage was pretty high if you were doing more than a few thousand at a time. So I had to kind of stagger my kind of exit from that position back into USDC, and that did eat into the profits, probably eating, I would say, about 50% of the profits that I kind of made with that thin liquidity. So be careful about the opportunities that you're looking at on Pendle, but I will do a separate video on that. And then on Solana, I'm using Camino. Unitas is a very small position, but it's quite an interesting opportunity. Again, I wouldn't put a lot into Unitas, but I've got 2 or 3 grand in there just playing around with that. It's quite an interesting one. You kind of like stake your USD. So it's called USDU, and then they have a staked version of that. You stake that, and currently it's paying around 13%. So I'd only do it for small amounts. They also have points that you can earn for potential airdrops. I think they've done one airdrop, and there's other ones kind of coming up. But Camino is the main platform I use for borrowing and lending on Solana. And then in terms of the decentralized exchanges, so this is basically where we're looking for liquidity pools. So Uniswap and Aerodrome for Ethereum and Base, and I really like VFAT as a kind of aggregated kind of front end for those. It makes it very easy to zap into kind of pools and out of them without having to kind of balance your collateral between the two that you want to kind of put into it. If you're going 50-50 into a kind of pool, it's quite easy to do that. But if you're entering a pool at the higher range or the lower kind of range, it makes it very easy with VFAT. You can enter with one one crypto, so you can enter with just USDC or just Ethereum or just Coinbase wrap Bitcoin or whatever. It's a really nice kind of front end on top of that. But they're the two I use mainly. A lot of Aerodrome on kind of base, but with VFAT as a kind of front end. And then on Solana, I'm using Orca and Radium. I don't have anything actually in Radium at the moment, but I have been having a few positions, and I've got a position currently live on Orca. I'm just doing some experiments, basically looking at using liquidity pools, the dollar cost average into coins compared to just holding the stables and then kind of buying at a lower price. So I've got some sort of some data for that, and I'll be collating those and putting some videos together about that later on. And then finally, just CeFi versus DeFi. I'm about 85% in decentralized finance. About 15% of my stables are in centralized finance. So I have a small amount in Nexo just because I have have the Nexo card and I can use that as a kind of crypto-backed debit card. Strike is where I have some Bitcoin. I always withdraw all my crypto off of exchanges where I kind of purchase them. My only exception to that is Strike. I don't have a huge amount. It's like maybe 10k or something like that in kind of Strike, but it's a nice way of buying Bitcoin that I used, a year or so ago when I was kind of like accumulating small amounts. Ledden is by far the largest centralized finance. I'm using that basically to earn yield on my USDC. That's on Ethereum mainnet, but they're currently paying 6.5% on the first 100k and 8% on balances above 100k. So the rates are pretty good. I'm not recommending them. Do your own due diligence, but I have used Ledden for several years, been very happy with their platform. And then other miscellaneous platforms that I'm using. Most of my USDC on Solana is actually on Drift, and I've been actively short Solana on Drift. So I'm currently in I think it's a 400 Solana short position on kind of Drift. I've been short since about $1.50 with Solana. So I've benefited from that. It's the only active kind of like trading short position I'm on, but I like Drift for that. I use dBridge as a cross-chain platform. I find that pretty good for exchanging between different kind of cryptos on different chains. Been happy with that. And then Coinbase I use as a basically an on and off ramp. So the reason I like kind of Coinbase as opposed to Gemini and various others is because I do a lot of stuff on Base, and you can deposit into kind of Coinbase and you can withdraw directly on the Base chain. Therefore avoiding the fees of having to withdraw on kind of Ethereum mainnet and then use a cross-chain platform like dBridge to move between one chain and the other. So that's the main platforms I'm using. As I said, mainly in stable coins, mostly in DeFi compared to DeFi versus CeFi. I will go through a lot of these individual platforms in detail going forward, but that's it for this video. If there's anything in particular you want me to address in future videos, do let me know in the comments below. But I hope you're having a good day. Take care, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.